第二场演讲呢，我们的日本讲员就要来告诉我们说，怎么样利用增味剂来 enhance 来加强我们的食物，就我们可以少用一点盐，可是东西又不会难吃，这就是人类最矛盾的地方，对不对？所有的东西我们都希望好吃，然后呢，但是又不要这个又能够让我们健康。好，那我们第二场的演讲的引言人，就是刚才其实在开幕时候有帮我们致辞的台湾生命科学会的会长。也是台大食品科技研究所的吕廷章教授。那吕会长呢，他是台湾很重要的食品分析检验的专家，他参与了很多台湾食品检验方法的订定。所以你们如果有什么不满，可以跟他讲。然后还有呢，很多这个食品这个检验机构的认证。所以如果你要开机构，你要对他好一点哈。那这个。吕老师对我们台湾的食品安全的这个把关是非常重要的哈，对，我们一定会对你非常好。来，我们的热烈掌声欢迎会长吕会长。
Thank you for the introduction. It's my pleasure to. I need my note. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Soo-Yeun Lee. Okay. He is the professor of the Washington State University and also the director of the School of the Food Science and Food Science. Dr. Lee's academic journey to the Washington State University began when he graduated from the Yonsei University. From Seoul, South Korea, he received her PhD in food science from the University of California, Davis in 2001. And after getting her PhD, he served as a faculty at the University of Illinois. And later on, he became the full professor and the assistant dean in the Office of Academic Program in the College of Agriculture, Consumer, and Environmental Science. Fortunately, I got my note. With the focus on the sensory science, he has made a great achievement in the food science. He has more than 100 of publications and has been the recipient for many numerous awards. And recently, the recent one is Fred Warner Lectureship Award from IFT, which is the most important institute in food science and technology. And he's going to share us with her recent research about the reducing sodium in the food system. Let's welcome Professor Lee.
Thank you. I'm going to walk up to the stage because I think the advancers over there. Yes. Thank you so very much for the wonderful introduction and also invitation to present my work. I'm, as introduced, currently at the School of Food Science at Washington State University as a professor and director, but most of my academic career has been at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and all of my presentation actually, the research has been done at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Just wanted to make sure that I provide that contribution. As Dr. Dong introduced, sodium overconsumption is very prevalent and it is also problematic. He has illustrated many different reasons why we want to reduce sodium, especially in terms of hypertension. And as you can see, sodium overconsumption is actually a global problem. It's not just in Taiwan. I wanted to point out, actually, I was looking at the map, I was like, oh, Taiwan's right here. And we're around like this area. You can see the color orange here. And my home country, Korea, is worse because It's in the red almost, right? With all the kimchi and salted pickles and things that we eat, and soups. Soup has a lot of salt. But if you look at the global picture, there isn't actually many countries that are in the zone of 2,000 or 2,300 milligram, which is the recommendation for WHO and also the US upper limit, which is 2,300 milligrams. So only a few countries in that area. So it is a global problem. I'm only going to really focus on the US consumption. I was invited as a US speaker, so most of my data is about US consumption. So sodium consumption in America, as you can see, on average is around 3,400 milligram. It is average based on male and female, and that is 131% above the upper limit of 2,300 milligram, and then 226% above the adequate intake, which is at 1,500 milligram. And as Dr. Dong illustrated, you will be above that adequate intake as you consume one bowl of ramen noodles. In fact, I think the sodium overconsumption and also the hypertension risk is greater in the US than Taiwan, because it is noted that greater than 97% of Americans ages 1 and up consume more than the adequate intake. So that's most of the population. So with that, in 2010, Institute of Medicine in the US has declared that we need to really focus on reducing sodium. And this has actually been going on since 1980s. So they have not been successful in reducing sodium intake. And so in 2010, they published a report on how and why we should reduce sodium. And in the report, they had indicated the needs on 3 different categories in terms of research on sodium consumption and reduction. So first one is understanding how salty taste preference developed throughout the lifespan. Saltiness is not innately, as you are born, a preferred taste. So babies, when they're neonates, right after they're born, if you put like salty substance on their tongue, they're kind of neutral to it. But as they grow into 6 months and above, they grow significant salty preference. Sweet taste, on the other hand, is an innate-like taste. So as babies are born in a neonate state, if you put sugar solution on their tongue, then they get really euphoric and they smile. On the other hand, bitterness is an innate dislike taste, and so if you put quinine solution or caffeine solution on their tongue, they would cry or gag. This is a protective mechanism of our body because we ingest food, and a lot of the poisonous compounds in the natural state, like alkaloids, they're bitter, and so we have that gag reflex to spit out and throw up in terms of the bitter compounds. So saltiness, in fact, is an innate yet kind of developed preference. But once it's developed after month 6 and beyond, then it grows to develop. So you tend to ingest more and more salt as you grow older. So that's something that they wanted to really investigate, how that preference developed over time. And then the second one is developing innovative methods to reduce sodium in foods while maintaining palatability, physical properties, and safety. And this is the area that I'm focusing on, trying to develop food that is palatable, likable, while we're actually reducing the salt that is innately preferred. And the third is enhancing current understanding of factors that impact consumer awareness and behavior relative to salt reduction. And I think that's what Dr. Dong alluded to, that, and I was surprised to see that this education, consumer education, has reduced over the course of the years, because that's something that IOM, the Institute of Medicine, was trying to focus on to see how consumer awareness and behavior changes over the years. Now, for food scientists like me, obviously the second area is of importance, and this is an important area for us to ponder as we talk about now in the personalized nutrition world, where we are developing products really customized for different groups of consumers. As a sensory scientist, I always say taste is king. No matter how healthful you make a product, unless the consumer consumes it, they're not going to get the benefit. So there's a saying in America, you can take the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I'm sure there's something similar in Chinese. So you can lead someone to healthful products. You can develop all the healthful products you want. Unless they consume it, they're not going to benefit from it. So palatability is a huge thing as you develop these type of products. In terms of the sources of sodium, I was very intrigued by the Taiwanese source or Chinese source, and I did understand that in different culture, there's different sources, especially in the Asian countries, because we cook more than America, that the consumption of salt is balanced between processed and also cooked food, like restaurant food and home food. In terms of America, as you can see, only, how do I go back? Okay, great. Only 30% of the food is ingested by home-cooked meals or restaurants. So that means 70% is coming from processed and packaged goods. So this is why FDA, as Dr. Dong mentioned, as they release some voluntary/mandatory reduction, they were targeting food industry because that's where the most impact will come from. So as you can see in the processed foods, number one is bread, grains, and cereal. And that's kind of surprising because bread, grains, and cereal, they don't necessarily taste salty. But there's a substantial amount of salt in it, and it's not only for palatability, but also for functionality. As the gluten develops, you need salt in it. So that's one of the main staple compound or food product that has salt. And it is because it is a staple food, just like rice is the staple food of Asian countries, bread is staple food of Western country. Following the bread and grains and cereal is red meats and poultry and eggs. So as you can imagine, the ham, the sausage, bacon, and then the dairy product, and that's mainly cheeses. It's a repeat of what I showed, but more in terms of how you can visualize it. So only 5% added while cooking at home. Only 6% added while eating, especially when you're in the restaurant and people tend to sprinkle on salt, so 6% added. And then 12% comes from natural sources. So tomatoes contain sodium, for example, right? 77% of US consumption of salt comes from processed and packaged goods. So it is a significant amount. And we have the salty 6 to visualize for the consumers to see and be aware of where the salt comes from. So mainly bread, and then cured meats, and rotisserie chickens and chicken products, pizza, obviously, soups, and we have sandwich here. And I'm sure you're all aware of Subway sandwich. Raise your hand if you don't know what Subway is. Everyone knows Subway, right? Okay. One Subway 6-inch contains 1,500 milligram on average sodium. So that's a lot because it has bread, it has cheese, and it has cured meat, right? So if you have, for Asians, we talk about ramen noodles for lunch. For Westerners, 6-inch Subway for lunch will be an adequate amount gone, right? Consumed. So sodium reduction initiatives starting from the 2010 Institute of Medicine's report started, but again, the sodium reduction initiative has started in 1980, so most of all the governments in the world hasn't been successful in that. In 2016, actually, FDA released the initial voluntary mandatory requirement, and they actually initially started with a short and long-term voluntary sodium reduction across the board of different processed food categories. And they had the 2-year as a short term and 10-year as a long term. And I show this slide because one of our initial studies that I'm going to share with you, which involves salty snacks, we targeted this because it was right after that release of that initiative. In more recent 2021, as Dr. Dong introduced, they revised their original 2 years and 10-year reduction goals to 2.5 years because they realized after the 2 years have passed and right before 10 years almost, they did not meet any of the goals that they set out to. Because initially when this was released, a lot of the food companies tried to reduce their salt in the products, including Campbell's soup. You probably know the Campbell's soup, canned soup. And they started seeing huge decline in their sales. And so for a company, that's a big problem. And so they went back to their original amount. So the consumers can tell the difference, right? So in 2021, they released a revised goal of 2.5 years, and it was around like 25% reduction on average across the board of processed food. And then in 2023, they also allowed salt substitute permission in standard of identity products. So in certain products, they have certain standard of identity, and so unless you meet those requirements, you can't claim that it's that product. For example, mayonnaise has a standard of identity. And FDA has actually revised that you can actually use salt substitute instead of salt and still claim the standard of identity. So that's a huge move, and those are some of the initiatives that in the US has been trying to implement, yet not successful in terms of the whole consumption level in the consumer. So for my research, the overall goal, and I'm now moving into my research area, was to provide more comprehensive understanding of impact of various salt reduction strategies that can have on consumer perception. And consumer perception is very important. As I mentioned, you can make all the healthful products you want unless you can have consumer buy it and consume it on a consistent level. You're not gonna have them benefit from it, right? And you can give all the education you want unless the consumers are willing to make the change and they like the taste, it's not going to be successful. So that was why I had that overall goal as a sensory scientist. And the central hypothesis is that the applicability of sodium reduction strategies will differ based on food matrix, consumer perception, and impact on sensory qualities. And this is kind of really wide varying. What I'm saying here is that based on what food product you're targeting, the strategies you'll implement will vary. So you can't use one-size-fits-all type of strategy. Okay, after all of my research projects have concluded, what I envisioned was that it will encourage food industry to address the need for the sodium reduction in their products, and also how would they implement different line of strategies so that they don't have to worry about the future mandated sodium reduction and the decline in sales. So they can try out different types of strategies. Also, I have the next line of slides is about a comprehensive review that we saw and we created and we published in terms of sodium reduction. And so in order for us to deliver the knowledge base of what kind of sodium reduction strategies are available, we did that research. So that's the in-depth literature review that is supporting that knowledge base for the industry to try out. And then also assist food product developers to understand the impact of various strategies on their products as they try to reduce sodium. I'm mainly focusing on sodium reduction, but the last project that I did was reduction in not only sodium, but also in sugar, because that's also very much a big problem in the US, the added sugar. And obesity is actually very prevalent. Overweight and obesity is very prevalent in the US and actually globally. And as you gain weight, just like as you consume more salt, there's a lot of correlation and association with chronic diseases. So these are the two review papers that I wanted to highlight. These are all open access, so if you want to look more in detail of what we published, you can go to the papers. I'm just going to give a very brief outline of this paper, the Compendium of Sodium Reduction Strategies in Foods. It was published in the Comprehensive Review in Food Science and Food Safety, which is a publication by IFT. So in the publication, this is kind of the highlight. We highlight all the sodium reduction strategies that are available in the literature, not only on the basis of journal articles, but also patents and book chapters and things like that were all included in the scoping review. Some of the main strategies that we found in the literature was stealth reduction, so stepwise reduction, such as that the consumers initially do not realize there's a sodium reduction and then go down again as they adapt to that taste. And then salt replacers, so such as potassium chloride, and then physical modifications, so having different diffusion or different concentration of sodium at different parts so that there's a different perception as you bite into it, so you don't get it as adapted. That's one of the ways you can modify solid products like bread or cheese. And also you can also modify the salt itself. So based on the size of the salt and how it's applied on the surface, it may make a difference in the saltiness perception. And then finally, the flavor enhancer. And I'm going to really focus on flavor enhancement, and I will explain why through our literature review findings. So the scoping review, I just wanted to give a brief background on the method. We included literature that is primary studies, which is research articles, literature reviews, that's a review article, book chapters, and patents. Time frame was 1970 until present, so quite comprehensive. And then language only in English, because all of us who were involved in the research only spoke English. Well, I speak Korean, but our PI who was involved in it only spoke English. And then the subject matter, we actually narrowed it to sodium reduction in terms of food technology, not intervention, like nutritional intervention. We excluded that. We were mainly interested in the strategies in food technology as food companies would implement. And also we only added the studies that had sensory component to it because we want to make sure that they did sensory tests to validate that the reduced sodium products were palatable. We used the PRISMA method to identify the articles to be included in the scoping review. So initially we started with 1,010 articles, and going through all the process using the PRISMA method, we ended up with 277 articles to be included in this review. So what we found in the literature, the primary categories of food that was investigated were cured meats, so protein foods. And then next to grains, so breads, rolls, and tortillas. And then the milk and dairy cheese. So it does correlate to the overall most consumed food. And then what we found in terms of the strategies, the first most prevalent strategy is salt replacers, such as potassium chloride. And then another right next to, very close to, is just removing salt. Do not do anything else, just remove salt. So salt removal without any mitigation. And then the next prevalent method was actually flavor modification, so using flavor enhancers. 31% of the literature that we investigated had that flavor modification as the strategy. And then followed by physical modification, as you saw, either the salt or the matrix. And then functional modifications, so adding binders and things like that, changing the other functional ingredients to see if salt reduction can be achieved. And the behavioral modification, we had a few, which I already mentioned that we did not include any intervention studies, but we did because these included some of the food technology too. When you look at the strategies and also the food in terms of combination, you can see protein food is across the board the highest amount that is in the literature that is being investigated. And then within protein food, salt replacer and functional modification is the highest. And then you can see that bread and grains, that's kind of the next, and mixed dishes. One of the things that we noticed is that beverage and juice category is very minimal. So when you look at literature review, these are the areas that you would actually identify for those of you who are students who are doing research, thinking what area should I investigate. This is the gap in the knowledge. So beverage juice area, condiment sauce area, which condiment and sauces can contain a lot of salt, and it's still relatively not much literature is available. In terms of years and how the publications are published, the papers are published, not much in the 1900s, and then you go to 2007, 8, 9, and then there's a whole lot of publication. And it coincides with the 2010 Institute of Medicine report, don't you think? So 2009, and then there's a lot of publications. Not much in terms of physical modification, so that's still a new area that we could investigate. Flavor modification has actually jumped quite a bit, which is nice. So there's a lot of umami and other flavor modification research being done recently. Still very prevalent are salt replacers and salt removal. So in terms of going into a little bit more specifics, salt replacers, potassium chloride is the most prevalent. 94% of the salt replacer literature encompasses potassium chloride. And then some blends and blend of salt replacers and other. So salt replacer plus flavor enhancer, or salt replacer plus functional application. Some calcium chloride and magnesium chloride studies have been done as well. Flavor modification, it is actually the most diverse category. So it encompasses a lot of different types of flavor modification. Umami ingredients is actually leading its way. So, for example, cheese, yeast, soy derivatives, and they don't specifically list out the chemical compounds that are being used. And then the glutamates, the monosodium glutamate, also known as MSG, and all the other glutamates that can be used as flavor enhancers. And these all confer to an umami taste. Some notable findings of our scoping review is that, and this is kind of a repeat, that meat and poultry, most investigative food category, although grains and breads are the most consumed in terms of sodium, and salt replacers are the highest in terms of investigated research area, and especially majority of the papers studied potassium chloride substitution. And then for flavor modification, it's the most diverse category of the methods, and it provides synergistic relationship, and also it gives a promising effect on across the board different matrices. Most of the umami flavor modification studies have been done in soups, but now there's more solid base and semi-solid base studies that are coming out, which I will like to present to you. So this is where our research area leads us to. Why did we want to investigate that? Because it seemed very promising. Yet most of the studies have been done in a liquid base and condiment base, so we wanted to make sure that we could actually investigate in terms of solid base, like breads and salty snacks. So umami, as you know, is the 5th basic taste, and I actually like to give a demonstration of umami taste to my students when I give my sensory lecture, and I give them a little dab of MSG in little cup, and not a whole lot, just a little dab. And they look at it and see, okay, was something in there? It's like, yeah, there's something in there. Don't do a bottoms up, do a little dab, because it's very potent, right? And it has this temporal profile that long lasting. And this is why it is used as a flavor enhancer. And in fact, monosodium glutamate, and I introduced this yesterday when I was presenting to NTU on a different topic. If you look at the chemical compound structure, it is not bad. I asked, what do you know about MSG to the students and people there? And they're like, not so good. Chinese restaurant syndrome. And I'm like, okay, let's break that myth. Monosodium glutamate has sodium, and glutamate is amino acid. Sodium is in sodium chloride. It breaks that way when you ingest it, no other way. So just the chemical compound itself, as you can see, is not going to be harmful. Also, it contains in many of the natural foods, so tomatoes, Parmesan cheese, mushrooms, soy sauce, potatoes, even breast milk has MSG. So in America, still nowadays, because of the wrong newsletter that was sent to, as a physician sent to a journal that was since then retracted, coined that term Chinese restaurant syndrome. In Chinese restaurant, it says no MSG. And when I see that, I want to tell the owners, that's a lie. You cannot have no MSG in your food, because MSG is in soy sauce, fish sauce, chicken, fish, beef, mushroom. Now, if you take all of that out, there's no Chinese food, right? So the newsletter I also mentioned to my students and also students at NTU, that retracted paper describe the symptoms that may occur when you consume it: nausea, stomach ache, sweating, headache. Those are all the symptoms when you overconsume any food. Chinese food tastes so good, people always overconsume Chinese food. So then you get those symptoms, right? So just want to break that myth. MSG is not the culprit. It's your appetite. All right, and then there's a new perception that we are investigating, kokumi. It is actually supposedly tasteless, but it provides some kind of a oomph, if you will, like a little bit of a texture and mouthfeel that can actually enhance a lot of the different tastes, including sweetness, because a lot of the sweetness have that kind of a blended oomph. And so most of the kokumi perception-based compounds are glutathione based. And there are Ajinomoto company and other companies that want to investigate kokumi has their own line of ingredients that has glutathione that would provide it. So we wanted to investigate the kokumi sensation in terms of reduced sweet products. Two of our early studies done were on rice puffs and potato chips, the snack products. And this is an application you can imagine. Salt is on the topical, on the surface, right? It's not dissolved. It's not embedded in the matrix, but it's on the surface. And we wanted to use the flavor enhancer to see how it would be useful. Especially this was right after the FDA mandatory initiative of 2 years and 10 years. 2 years on average requested 20% reduction, 10 years requested around 50% reduction. So you can imagine 50% reduction in salt in a salty snack is a challenge. Why do we eat potato chips? Because we want salt, right? We want the crunchy and salt. That's why. So if you reduce 50% of it, it's going to be a huge challenge for the consumers to like it. So that's the two studies are published in Journal of Food Science. The aim of the study was to see if we can use flavor enhancers such as monosodium glutamate and I plus G to see that if we reduce to that amount, 20% and 50%, we can still have consumer acceptability to the level that we want in a blind tasting condition, so without any information. And then we also wanted to see if we were to give the ingredient information, would people still like it? Because we had that kind of idea, well, if they see MSG, they're going to decrease their liking, right? So we wanted to see ingredient information, how that would affect. And then next, if we were to educate people how bad salt is and how not bad MSG is, and you can replace significant amount of salt that we need to reduce with a very small amount of MSG and give that educational piece, would their liking go up? So that was kind of our goal, blind tasting, ingredient information with education. These are the products that we used. Rice puffs, probably very familiar to what you would find in Chinese market. Potato chips, very prevalent in the US market. 2-year goal for that was set by FDA was 20%, 10-year was 57% for rice puffs. For potato chips, it's 18% and 51%. Again, reducing more than 50% of sodium on a product like this is very challenging, and to expect the consumers to buy it. This is the educational piece that we used at that education stage of the test. In entirety, we mandated people to read it. I'm not going to mandate you to read it because we have time limit. The parts that include are the need for sodium reduction, just like what Dr. Dong presented. Extreme sodium intake causes hypertension, and the FDA guidelines that had that initiative to decrease sodium in products. However, when you decrease it, you have decrease in liking as well. So in order to mitigate that, use of flavor enhancers will help it and people will like it. And also we put how safe it is and that it's naturally occurring. What we found, flavor enhanced samples were rated the highest. Yay! Yes, you can applaud. So 50% reduction, and you add MSG and I plus G, you get the highest liking rating. Yay, we were successful. Ingredient information, very surprisingly, did not decrease liking. So this is actually really good news. The younger generation, you guys are smart. You know your chemistry. You know MSG is not bad, right? And you are not influenced by the old people. So you still like it after you see that those are in the products. And because of that, education really did not make any difference because the liking remained, or even, you know, they liked it more. In addition to the consumer test, we did descriptive analysis, which creates a sensory profile of the products. And what we found was savory, salty, garlic, and crunchy are the drivers of liking in these products, which is kind of a duh, right? You know, it's a salty snack. These are the drivers of liking. The next one, we wanted to actually investigate in bread because, as I mentioned, bread, tortilla rolls, the grain products are one of the highest in terms of salt contributors in the US diet. And really, flavor enhancers hasn't been used in bread products. So it was a new area of research which was funded by Ajinomoto and the International Glutamate Technical Committee. So we thought this was really nice to publish. And it is actually published in Journal of Food Science. I think there's 2 presentation or publications in Journal of Food Science. So again, why bread? It is one of the top 3 contributing sources and consumed as staple food. And actually, consumption does not stop at 1 slice. Americans consume bread over the course of the day, multiple slices. Role of salt in bread makes it very tricky to replace, because it's not just the taste that the salt contributes in bread. It is actually a functional ingredient to strengthen gluten network, regulate yeast activity, which then, obviously, with the gluten and yeast activity, assists in the rising of the dough. So it is very much so a tricky ingredient. Ooh, really? Oh no, okay, let's go really fast, because I didn't realize. Isn't it until 15? Oh, okay.
3 p.m.
3 p.m. Okay, sorry. Okay. So the samples were white and multigrain, but I think I need to actually stop in the middle of it. But anyway, there's, go back. The samples were full sodium, reduced sodium, and we reduced to the level of 10 years almost, or for bread, it was 43%, and reduced more than 10 years reduction. And we had with and without MSG for both. This is a very complicating slide, so I'm going to actually skip to the conclusion. But what you can see is that white bread liking is primarily driven by salty taste and firm and chewy texture, which is governed by salt, actually. But you do see that there are some consumers here, those are dots, or consumers that like savory and salty bread containing flavor enhancers. Multigrain bread liking is primarily driven by also salty taste and dense texture, but also there are some consumers that like the sweet taste, and that is conferred by the MSG as well. So the conclusion is that with bread products, you can actually replace certain amount of salt with MSG and get that savory and salty flavor, but the problem remains with the texture. So that's kind of what we found, and the limitations of reduction, because we went all the way down to 10-year goal, and then even further. That was one of the things that we mentioned, that it was difficult to get to that challenge level. The last one was done in ketchup, because ketchup has both salty and sweet, and we wanted to investigate both umami and kokumi, and this is what I'm saying, why ketchup and why kokumi. And in that, we have reduction in 20% in sodium, reduction in 25% in sugar, and both reduction in sodium and sugar, and in which case the reduction of sodium, we use the MSG. In terms of reduction of sugar, we use the kokumi ingredient, which is Savor Boost. And then for reduction in both, we use both umami and kokumi ingredients. What we found was that actually salt reduction did not make any difference. So no significant difference between salt and salt-reduced products and control. Whereas sweetness actually made a big difference and significant difference. However, if you use both kokumi and umami ingredients, the liking goes up to the level of control. So this is very promising. What you see in terms of cluster analysis, there are segments of consumers who actually really don't like sugar reduction. Significant difference there. But salt reduction, especially with enhancement, they're okay with it. These are umami likers. So you can actually target these consumers. Half of our tested population was that. However, there are actually consumers who like no addition, even when it's reduced, but when there's enhancement, they don't like it. They can actually tell the enhancement. They can tell the MSG and kokumi perception, and these are sensitive to enhancement population. There's half of those people. I'm thinking they might be the older generation. We also had some nutritional information survey, which I am not going to go into. And the final conclusion is that salt reduction is actually generally accepted in a condiment like ketchup, which is great news. And sugar reduction is less acceptable. However, when you do salt and sugar reduction and add both umami and kokumi ingredients, it goes back to its original liking, which is great. And then the consumer nutrition information it's not really relevant to food science, so I'm just going to skip that. And these are the conclusions of the whole project. Future work should actually be geared toward consumer-focused, industry-focused, regulatory-focused areas, which will be very distinctly different. Consumer education awareness versus industry focus would be like this type of study where there's more food technology. And then regulatory focused is if mandating makes a difference. And then in terms of the bread, consumers do not differ in liking of bread compared to informed versus non-informed, sodium reduction and MSG inclusion. And actually, moderate level of sodium reduction is well accepted in bread. That's a really big finding. So hopefully, American industry, food companies, bread companies would realize this and reduce salt in their bread. And then sodium reduction in condiments like ketchup and sugar reduction can be viable, especially using flavor enhancement. I made it. Yay.
Well, thank you so much. Well, let's give a warm welcome, Dr. Lee. Well, personally, I really enjoyed your talk, and I believe most of the audience, especially those students, there are a lot of students here and online. They must be so impressed by your inspiring research because they were told not to use MSG since they were a child. And hopefully they will change their mind and they will change their impression about MSG. 那今天应该很多人是第一次听到，就是说哦，好像味精是 OK。像我自己每次跟人家说我炒菜用味精，人家都看着我说。你不是说你在食品营养系教书吗？你怎么会用那个邪恶的东西这样哈？所以这个研讨会很棒，就是大家要改变一下想法，也很希望你们能够分享在你们自己的社交平台上，今天学到的东西可以把它推广出去。不过你如果不懂就不要写哈，懂得再写。OK， 我们再一次热烈掌声，谢谢 Dr. Lee，Thank you。好。